Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed, where we take a stack of sources and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge or insight. Today, we're plunging into a topic that feels ripped straight from a blockbuster movie, yet its roots run ancient and deep. The fascinating and often unsettling history of exorcism within Catholic Christianity. And to kick us off, here's a truly captivating fact. The 21st century is experiencing what many scholars are now calling a second golden age of the exorcist. Think about that.
Yeah, it's quite something.
We're seeing more books, more media attention, and more open discussions about Catholic exorcism than perhaps at any time since the Counter-Reformation. This phenomenon has truly captured the global imagination, largely thanks to cinema. William Friedkin's iconic 1973 film, The Exorcist, for instance, based on a real 1949 case, transformed the priest-exorcist into a universally recognized, albeit often sensationalized, figure.
Absolutely. That film had a massive impact.
Right. So this contemporary surge in popularity, after centuries where the practice was often marginalized and met with suspicion both inside and outside the church, raises a crucial historical question. How did such a controversial ritual manage such a powerful, dramatic rebirth? How did it go from the fringes back to front and center?
That's precisely the question we'll be exploring in this deep dive. Our mission for you, the listener, is to embark on a comprehensive journey through a history of exorcism in Catholic Christianity.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at the institution, but at the ritual itself, tracing its textual, canonical, and historical evolution, examining how beliefs and practices have profoundly shifted over centuries.
Yep.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll not only understand what can truly be considered exorcism within this tradition, but also how it has been perceived and what its enduring presence tells us about the persistent landscape of human belief. We'll be asking a crucial question. Do these 21st century exorcisms truly hark back to the Middle Ages, or are they a distinctly modern phenomenon with roots in much more recent history? It's a journey through faith, fear, and the enduring power of the unseen.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the very beginning, starting with the word exorcism itself. It has a surprising origin. The Latin word exorcizo is actually a direct borrowing from the Greek horkos, which meant an oath in a legal sense.
Right, a legal oath, not spooky spirits initially.
Exactly. So to exorcise, in its original Greek and Latin legal meanings, meant quite literally to swear an oath. And the Latin coniro, which meant to take an oath together, evolved into our English word conjure. It sounds like these linguistic roots quickly blurred the lines between strictly legal or religious senses and something that feels a lot more magical. How did that ambiguity manifest?
It's a crucial point, and it reflects a deeper historical truth. As the scholar Amirab argues, early Christianity was, suffused with the vocabulary of magic, making it incredibly difficult for people back then to differentiate Christian spiritual practices from what was then understood as magic until maybe around the 4th century.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So this shows a deep intertwining at the linguistic and conceptual level, where the very words used to describe these spiritual acts carried a dual resonance, constantly teetering between sanctioned religious practice and something perceived as more pagan or unauthorized. The ambiguity was baked into the language itself.
So if the words themselves are so close and the vocabulary of magic was so prevalent, how did the church, or even the average person, start to tell the difference? Was there a clear ruling, or was it more of a gradual shift in understanding? What was the actual key differentiator between exorcism and ritual magic?
Well, the crucial differentiator, as our sources point out, has always been authorization. That's the key.
Authorization.
Yes. The prevailing view was that the main difference between exorcism and ritual magic has been one of authorization rather than form or function. Ritual magic is unauthorized exorcism.
Okay, that's clear.
This is a critical insight, revealing a great deal about the Church's evolving strategy for controlling spiritual power. Functionally, there was often significant overlap. Many medieval and early modern grimoires, which were essentially spellbooks for ritual magic, actually required the operator to be a priest, a cleric, or at the very least, a baptized Christian.
Really?
No.
So the ritual itself could look almost identical?
Pretty much. To an outsider, a sanctioned exorcism might have looked almost identical to an unsanctioned magical ritual. The power, then, wasn't just in the ritual itself, but in the Church's stamp of approval. It was about who had the authority.
That's a powerful point about control and authorization. Unauthorized exorcism is simply ritual magic. Now let's get into the core concepts we associate with this: possession, exorcism, and demonology. Are these just three different ways of describing the same phenomena?
Not at all. And it's vital to clarify that these three concepts have distinct and separable histories, even though, as you noted, their histories are deeply intertwined.
Okay.
Think of it this way. Demonology is the theory, right? The abstract understanding of demons and evil spirits. It's the framework. This theoretical understanding underlies every exorcism to a greater or lesser extent.
Got it.
The theory. Then you have possession, which is the state of being under the influence or control of these spirits. The affliction itself. Now, while not all instances of possession have historically led to exorcism, it's certainly true that there is no exorcism without possession.
Makes sense.
The act of exorcism, then, is the specific ritual performed to expel the possessing entity. That's the intervention. So while they form an interconnected triad, each element has its own historical trajectory, theological nuances, and evolving interpretations over time.
And on the topic of possession itself, I think many of us have a very specific, often Hollywood-influenced idea of what that means, something inherently evil, certainly. But you're suggesting the historical understanding was far more ambiguous than that simple good versus evil binary.
What's truly fascinating here is how complex that term actually was. We really have to challenge that common perception. Scholar David Frankfurter, for instance, argues that divine possession was also a feature of early Christianity.
Divine possession, like by good spirits.
Exactly. We're not just talking about evil entities here. People could be described as possessed by angelic spirits or even saints. Imagine in late 4th century Nola, there are accounts of individuals claiming to be afflicted by none other than Saint Felix.
Wow, St. Felix, that's unexpected.
Right. This demonstrates that possession itself can be considered a neutral term and a perennial form taken by religious experience. It's about being influenced by a spiritual entity, not automatically an evil one. In fact, we even find surprising historical subcategories like demoniac saints, individuals who are either officially or unofficially venerated for their holiness, sometimes despite or even because of their possession.
Demoniac saints, that really complicates things.
It absolutely does. It complicates any simple good versus evil classification we might instinctively apply today, revealing a much richer, more varied spiritual landscape in earlier centuries.
That's a truly surprising insight, demoniac saints. It forces us to rethink our assumptions about possession. So if the identity of the possessor wasn't always fixed, this fluidity extended to the very nature of demons themselves, didn't it? They weren't always seen as the well-defined adversary we often imagine today.
Precisely. The devil, in a historical sense, genuinely lacks a fixed and wholly coherent identity, because his nature and significance vary according to the time and place in which he is perceived. This is a crucial understanding.
Okay.
As Raiswell, a scholar on the topic, notes, for pre-modern people and in Scripture, angels, devils, demons, unclean, lying, or vile spirits were not necessarily seen as distinct. Scripture made no sharp distinctions between them. It was a much more fluid spiritual landscape,
Right.
where the categories were less rigid than many non-theological systems might suggest. The lines were often blurred, and the specific characteristics attributed to these entities could shift dramatically based on context.
So if the identity of the demon was so fluid, and even the categories of spiritual beings were indistinct, how did early Christians actually deal with them in practice? Was there a focus on understanding who the demon was, or just getting rid of it?
This leads us to A.K. Peterson's functionalist approach, which offers a very practical answer. He argued that the concept of demon in early Christian thought was simply too open and diffuse for a substantive definition to even be possible.
So defining it was almost impossible.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Therefore, Peterson defined the demon as whatever required exorcism. What this means for us and for the people of the time is that they weren't necessarily getting bogged down in abstract theology. If something was clearly causing suffering, whether it was an illness, strange behavior, or an internal torment, and the church had a ritual to combat it, that was the demon.
Okay. A pragmatic approach.
Very much so. It shifted the focus from philosophical debate to practical intervention and healing. Interestingly, this functionalist approach is still somewhat echoed in the contemporary Catholic Church, which has generally discouraged excessive speculation about the nature of demons, preferring to focus on the authorized rite rather than delving into theoretical debates.
That makes perfect sense for practical application. If it requires exorcism, it's a demon. But still, this raises another fascination question. If demons are so undefined and their identity can be fluid, does that mean there was ever a theological debate about whether they could even be redeemed? I mean, we usually think of demons as irredeemably evil, permanently locked into their adversarial role.
This raises an important question indeed. and it speaks to how deeply theological definitions impacted the perceived fate of these entities. While Augustine, a towering figure in the 4th century, emphasized the potential of evil to corrupt the good and saw demons as evil in their essence, not everyone agreed.
Oh, who disagreed?
Well, there's an intriguing 9th century theological debate with Erigena, who, deeply influenced by the theology of Maximus the Confessor, actually entertained the possibility that the demons might be redeemed.
Redeemed? Wow.
Yeah. It was a truly radical thought, a glimmer of universalism regarding even the forces of evil. And this radical idea foreshadowed a more positive view of the human body that would emerge in later centuries. This debate had direct implications for the liturgy of exorcism itself. In texts like the Gelone Sacramentary, the prayers for exorcism actually oscillated between calls for God to engage in conflict with the devil and simply confronting the demons with the disempowering truth, expecting them to depart simply by virtue of Christ's incarnation.
So different approaches within the same text.
Exactly. This dual approach highlights the theological tensions regarding the true nature and ultimate fate of these adversarial spirits. It wasn't always a simple get-out command.
Let's journey back to the early Christian West, roughly from 300 to 900 AD, to understand how exorcism first cemented its place within the nascent church. In the early church, from the mid-2nd to mid-3rd century, exorcism wasn't just a side activity. It was apparently a critical mechanism of Christian self-definition. This is a crucial insight. How did a ritual become so fundamental to defining who you were as a Christian?
It's all about reframing the spiritual world, you see. Christian demonology radically reframed the gods of the ancient world. They weren't just rival deities. They were cast as malevolent, evil beings, manifestations of the demonic.
Right. Rebranding the old gods.
Precisely. This meant that systematically renouncing these perceived evil gods became a core prerequisite for baptism. If you lapsed back into paganism, you were seen as falling under the dominion of these very demons and were often believed to be possessed by them. So the act of renunciation and expulsion through exorcism was a clear, dramatic demarcation, establishing Christian identity in stark contrast to the pagan world it was replacing. It was a way of saying, I belong to this side now.
And this act of self-definition quickly transformed even the most foundational Christian rituals. Baptism, which was originally quite simple, seems to have become a highly dramatic event.
Absolutely. By the beginning of the 3rd century, the once simple rite of baptism underwent a liturgical transformation to become a drama of resolute and sometimes fierce struggle against the devil. The catechumen, the one preparing for baptism, was symbolically cleansed of these evil influences.
So how did that start? Was it always part of baptism?
Well, scholars have debated the precise origin of this pre-baptismal exorcism. Some suggested sin demons residing in the unbaptized. Others linked it to early internal church controversies like the Donatist Schism, a major conflict about clerical purity, where the idea of exorcising objects like oil and water gradually extended to the catechumens themselves.
Interesting. So it might have evolved from internal debates?
Possibly. Whatever the precise origin, by around 250 AD, exorcism was firmly established as an integral part of the baptismal rite in Rome. It was standard practice.
So it wasn't just about expelling evil, but also about protecting. The Roman rites approach to these baptismal exorcisms included both truly exorcistic elements and what are called apotropaic applications. Could you clarify what apotropaic means in this context and why it was so important?
Certainly. Apotropaic refers to rituals or objects designed not just to cast out existing evil, but also to actively protect the candidate here and now from future spiritual incursions while they were undergoing the baptismal ceremonies. It was about warding off evil before it could take hold.
Like a spiritual shield.
Exactly. This is particularly true with the anointing with the exorcised oil of catechumens. And these unique features, such as the exorcistic formulas addressed to water, salt, and oil to drive away evil influences from physical objects, were so successful in the Roman Rite that they were perpetuated and expanded throughout the West. It highlights a holistic approach to spiritual defense, not just offense. And it's important to note that in the very early church, extrabaptismal exorcism, that is, exorcism performed outside the context of baptism, was inherently missionary in purpose.
Missionary? How so?
Well, Christian authors often included conventional tales of exorcisms in their apologetic works as a literary topos, a recurring theme or motif, to demonstrate the power of their new faith over the old gods. It was a form of advertising almost.
Ah, like propaganda.
In a way. Interestingly, early sources show no sign that this type of exorcism of demoniacs was a formal liturgical act performed exclusively by the clergy. There was a less formalized beginning, often carried out by any believer with a charism or spiritual gift to do so. This tells us a lot about the grassroots nature of early Christian evangelism.
That's fascinating. So initially more informal, even a literary device. Visually, how did people understand possession and expulsion back then? Were there specific images that captured the struggle?
The iconography is quite telling, and it evolves over time. The earliest representation of a demoniac in the West to show the demon actually leaving the body is found on the ivory cover of the Murano Gospel from the late 5th century. It depicts the Gerasene demoniac with the demon leaving from his head.
From the head, okay.
Yeah. Later, a more common motif emerged in a Syriac Gospel from the late 6th century, showing the demon departing from the mouth, a visual that would spread throughout the West via Byzantine influence and become a dominant image for centuries. You see that image a lot. The demon coming out of the mouth. Okay. So it started as informal and missionary, then became tied to baptism. When did it really begin to become a formalized written liturgical practice for general extrabaptismal use, specifically performed by an appointed official? Well, the earliest reference to a written rite of extrabaptismal exorcism appears in the Gregorian sacramentary. During the ordination service for an exorcist, a libellus, or little book, was placed in their hands with specific words. Receive this and commit it to memory, and have the power of laying hands upon an energumen, whether baptized or catechumen.
And an energumen.
An energumen was a person afflicted by an evil spirit. So this implies the libellus contained a specific rite for exorcising both baptized and unbaptized individuals.
And where did this idea of an ordained exorcist come from?
This practice itself derived from the 7th canon of the 4th Council of Carthage in 398 AD, and a letter from Pope Innocent III, around 417 AD, which explicitly established episcopal jurisdiction over exorcisms. The bishop had to be involved. This is a crucial precursor to the much stricter controls that would be imposed much later, reflecting a growing desire for ecclesiastical oversight and formal structure over a powerful spiritual practice.
And as this practice was taking shape, were there enduring themes that really defined exorcism for centuries to come, threads that we can trace throughout its long history?
Indeed. Lactantius, an early 4th century Christian author, identified 4 themes that remained profoundly significant throughout the history of exorcism, almost like foundational elements.
Okay, what were they?
First, he linked exorcism to disunity, suggesting that demonic activity correlated with theological and political divisions among Christians. Second, exorcism served as vindication, proof that God was on the side of those who could cast out evil spirits, affirming their faith.
Right, proof of power.
Third, there was always that ambiguous relationship between exorcism and magic, that constant tension between what was sanctioned and what was considered illicit. And fourth, the link between exorcism and violence, whether spiritual or at times physical, was consistently present.
Disunity, vindication, magic, violence.
Exactly. These 4 themes are like persistent threads that run through the entire historical tapestry of this complex practice, even as its forms and contexts changed over the centuries. You see them pop up again and again.
Now let's fast forward to the Middle Ages, from about 900 to 1500 AD. This period saw what scholar André Gaudu called a crisis of exorcism. He observed a notable decline in the number of exorcisms in saints' lives from the 12th century onwards. Why did this crisis occur, and what did it mean for the practice?
Well, it wasn't an abandonment of the practice. Instead, it led to a significant shift in emphasis. Exorcism became less about the dramatic, definitive defeat of the devil by a charismatic saint, the big showdown.
Right.
And more liturgical and therapeutic, focusing on healing through regulated ritual. Saints' hagiographies, the stories of their lives, began to emphasize other miracles, like healing physical ailments, rather than just casting out demons.
So the focus shifted away from just demon fighting.
Precisely. This shift makes studying medieval exorcism particularly challenging due to the nature of the historical evidence. We primarily have 2 types. Liturgical books, which are conservative and often don't tell us if or how the rites were actually used, though changes in these books do signal shifts in practice.
Okay, the official books.
Then there are historical hagiographical accounts found in sermons, saints' lives, or personal letters. The problem with these is they rarely distinguish genuine demonic possession from other illnesses. In fact, exorcism was regularly used as a quasi-medical treatment for physical illnesses, complicating our understanding.
So they'd use exorcism for, like, a fever.
Potentially, yes, or other afflictions. These accounts tended to focus on the saint's success, rather than the precise methods, blurring the lines between spiritual and physical healing even further. It wasn't always clear-cut.
So it was a blurred line between spiritual and medical treatment. And as the Middle Ages drew to a close, we see a crucial change in focus for exorcism, especially with the terrifying rise of witchcraft fears. How did that change the way the church viewed and used exorcism?
This is a profound transformation. As Chav Mahir insightfully notes, exorcism shifted from being primarily a tool for the conversion of pagans in the High Middle Ages to becoming part of the campaign against magicians by the end of the period.
Ah, the focus shifts to witches and magicians.
Exactly. This is where we see texts like the Dominican Johannes Schneider's Formicarius from 1431, one of the first to extensively deal with witchcraft, even labeling inspired women as witches, which was a dangerous and often fatal accusation. Later, Kramer's infamous Malleus Maleficarum of 1386, the witch's hammer, took an even more extreme stance. It doubted the efficacy of traditional sacramentals like the sign of the cross or holy water against witchcraft, arguing instead for judicial remedies, that is, trials and executions.
Wow. So exorcism wasn't enough for witchcraft, according to them.
Not according to Kramer, no. This effectively elevated witchcraft as a distinct threat, often beyond the reach of standard exorcistic practice, demanding a more punitive legal response. It became a matter for the courts, not just the priest.
That's a profound shift from converting pagans to combating witches through legal means. Now, speaking of theological underpinnings, how did influential thinkers like Thomas Aquinas shape the understanding of possession and the possessed, especially when accusations could be so devastating?
Thomas Aquinas, as a towering figure in medieval theology, had a significant influence. He affirmed the Augustinian view that all the unbaptized are subjected to the power of the devil, which naturally justified the continuation of baptismal exorcism.
Okay, so he upheld that tradition.
Yes, but crucially, Aquinas also introduced safeguards for human free will that were quite progressive for his time. He denied that demons could affect voluntary thoughts or know the future, as these powers belonged only to God.
So demons couldn't control your thoughts or know the future.
According to Aquinas, no. This meant that a demoniac, while afflicted, was generally seen as an object of pity rather than censure, rather than someone culpable for their possessed state or in collusion with the devil. This theological protection of free will was a key development, offering a degree of compassion to the afflicted, at least in theory.
But even with Aquinas' emphasis on non-physical influence, the physical aspect of exorcism and possession seemed to persist or even increase. How can we reconcile these two seemingly contradictory ideas?
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Despite Aquinas' efforts to portray demons as non-physical beings affecting the will indirectly, scholars like Cassiola have demonstrated that medieval possession was often understood in very tangible terms, and physical ingestion and ejection, like swallowing a demon.
Literally.
That was the understanding, often. This visceral understanding meant that exorcism increasingly became an increasingly physical activity. By the 15th century, exorcists were even routinely exorcising individual body parts, including the heart, which was then seen as the seat of the soul.
Exorcising body parts.
Yes. This was almost a subtle nod to Aquinas' idea that demons couldn't directly affect the will, so the battle became a more visceral, physical one over the body itself, a spiritual tug-of-war for the soul's vessel.
And what about everyday protective measures? Did people use amulets or other apotropaic practices to ward off evil?
Yes, absolutely. Apotropaic amulets, objects believed to have protective powers, were quite common. These were often strips of parchment inscribed with scripture, worn for protection. Very popular.
Like good luck charms, but religious.
Sort of, yeah. And these popular practices even influenced official liturgy. There's a vivid anecdote from 1367 about Anthony of Padua, who gave a woman an amulet with the words, "Behold the cross of Christ. Flee hostile powers. The lion from the tribe of Judah and the root of David vanquishes. Alleluia. Alleluia."
Wow, that's quite a phrase.
It is. And these very words were later incorporated into the 1614 Roman rite of exorcism and are still found on the popular medal of St. Benedict, demonstrating the deep intertwining of popular piety and official ritual, where folk traditions could even shape formal church practice.
So as the Middle Ages progressed, the awareness of the demonic seemed to grow, leading to an increase in resources for exorcists, almost professionalizing the practice.
Absolutely. The period after 1400 saw a rapid growth in the number of exorcism books available. While exorcism wasn't entirely unregulated, these specialized manuals reflected a greater awareness of the demonic and a need for guidance.
What was in these books?
Well, these texts didn't just contain ancient rites. They supplemented them with prayers against witchcraft, litanies of the saints, and pharmaceutical recipes. They also emphasized the need for proving the possession of the demoniac and elaborate questioning of demons. anticipating the meticulousness of later periods.
Questioning demons, like in the movies.
Somewhat, yeah. This proliferation of books marked a shift where the expertise of the exorcist and their manual became increasingly important, sometimes even more so than the inherent power of a saint's tune. Knowledge became key.
Were there unique regional adaptations during this time? For instance, in Anglo-Saxon England, how did they grapple with these ideas of demonic influence?
The Anglo-Saxon tradition offers a fascinating example of cultural adaptation. There was a unique adjuration for water. I adjure you, creature of water, which is distinctive because it assumes an evil spirit might lurk in water itself and addresses the water as a conscious being, demanding it honor God.
Talking to the water?
Essentially, yes. This may have originated from the baptism of pagan Anglo-Saxons, where clergy were adapting to local beliefs, incorporating and recontextualizing existing folk beliefs about spirits and nature. Furthermore, Elfric of Ansham's definition of an exorcist evolved. Initially, he described an exorcist as one who adjures with an oath the accursed spirits, but later simply as an adjurer who reads over the insane and firm with no explicit mention of demons.
So the definition changed. Less focus on demons.
It seems so. This reflects a shifting emphasis, perhaps even suggesting a belief that only sinful individuals who open themselves to the devil were truly in danger of possession, rather than an omnipresent spiritual threat affecting everyone.
That's a stark contrast. And surprisingly, despite all these anxieties, there was even a lighter side to the fear of the devil in medieval England, wasn't there? A bit of comic relief amidst the serious business of confronting evil.
Indeed. Despite the very real anxieties surrounding the demonic, there was a distinctive strain of comic devils that permeated English culture. Master John Sorn, medieval England's most famous exorcist, actually had a cult associated with healing rather than just exorcism.
A healing exorcist.
Sort of. His most famous exploit involved imprisoning the devil in a boot, which became a comic figure rather than an object of pure terror.
The devil in a boot? Seriously?
Seriously. This tradition of the devil in the boot profoundly influenced English folklore, giving us centuries of stories about parsons outsmarting and imprisoning the devil in various receptacles long after the Reformation. It shows a fascinating human tendency to lighten fear with humor, even when confronting the ultimate adversary, a way of domesticating the threat, maybe.
Moving into the Counter-Reformation, the 16th and 17th centuries were truly a second golden age for exorcism, marked by an almost limitless expansion of the practice. This period was heavily fueled by widespread fears of witchcraft and the intense violence of religious conflict across Europe. Could you paint a picture of just how intense these beliefs and events could be?
Oh, it was an era of profound spiritual drama. Imagine the scene from a dramatic exorcism in Lorac, southern France in 1604, where a man was being freed from a pact with an evil spirit. After days of prayers, the demon finally departed in the form of a flame of fire, with a great stench and of such force that it gave a great blow to the two assistants, one of them on the face and the other on the ear, from which he remains deaf.
Wow, a flame of fire and a deafening blow. That's intense.
Exactly. This kind of dramatic account highlights the sheer intensity and palpable fear surrounding the demonic during this era, and why people sought such potent interventions. The spiritual conflict was often seen as very real, very physical.
That's a terrifying account, showcasing the intense belief and palpable fear of the time. But even with such dramatic events fueling this resurgence, we start to see some fascinating internal pushback, don't we? Some within Catholicism itself began to voice skepticism.
Absolutely. Even amidst this resurgence, there were early Catholic skeptics who questioned the more extreme manifestations or applications of exorcism. Figures like Erasmus, for instance, offered satirical observations on what he saw as superstitious folly.
Erasmus, the famous humanist.
The very same. While his critiques were later weaponized as anti-Catholic propaganda by Protestants, they originated from within Catholic intellectual circles. Other Catholic authors, such as Pedro Ciruelo, raised objections primarily to the exorcism of animals and inanimate objects, not necessarily people.
So, questioning exorcising cats or chairs, maybe?
Something like that. This fostered a mood or climate which privileged the need for discernment within the church, encouraging caution and a more rigorous approach, especially concerning who is performing these rites and on what. It was about ensuring theological purity and preventing abuses.
And these cautious voices, combined with the widespread fear of witchcraft, led to a demand for more standardized, approved manuals for exorcists, didn't they? What were some of the most influential ones, and what did they tell us about the era's concerns?
Precisely. The period saw influential popular manuals like Mengi's Compendio dell'arte esorcistica and Stampa's Fuga Satani, Flight of Satan. These works reflected the preoccupations of the time, effectively merging exorcism, counter-witchcraft, and epitropaic practices.
So they mixed exorcism with anti-witchcraft stuff.
Yes. For example, Stampas Fuga included rites for the burning of the written names and images of demons, and instructions for the use of the stole, where tying knots in the stole created invisible spiritual bonds as a form of counter-witchcraft.
Tying knots in a stole, how did that work?
It was symbolic magic, essentially, using a sacred object to bind evil forces. These manuals also presented broader applications, such as the blessing of a house from Satan, which essentially served as an ecclesiastical disinfectant against natural hazards and hidden traps of the enemy, illustrating a wide-ranging desire for spiritual protection, not just for people, but their environments too.
So it wasn't just people being exorcised, but entire buildings. Was this a common practice, this idea of haunted houses requiring spiritual cleansing?
Indeed, the exorcism of buildings became a distinct and recognized concern. The Jesuit Peter Thyreus, in his 1604 work Lucis Infestis, meaning concerning infested places, specifically addressed the problem of haunted houses, providing a rite that included invocations, psalms, gospel readings, and incense to cleanse and purify the space.
A house cleansing ritual.
Exactly. This practice even found its way into more official liturgies, with a 1631 Spanish Rituale Romanum, including a rite titled Exorcismus Domus a Demonio Vexate, exorcism of a house troubled by a demon. This highlights a legacy that, in certain forms, is still very much alive today, connecting the spiritual health of individuals to the spiritual health of their dwelling places. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, as it marks a pivotal moment in the history of Catholic exorcism. The publication of the 1614 Rituale Romanum. This was a game changer.
The 1614 rite? Okay, why was it so important?
It was the last of the Tridentine liturgical books, a monumental effort by the Council of Trent to standardize and regulate Catholic liturgy after the Reformation. What was truly groundbreaking was Cardinal Santori's decision to base the rite of exorcism not on the popular, often magically tinged practices of contemporary exorcists like Mengi, but on the most ancient available sacramentaries.
Going back to the older sources.
Right. By doing this, Santori fundamentally transformed official Catholic attitudes, turning exorcism from a common, often unregulated event into an exceptional procedure, strictly governed by canon law. This move reflected a conscious effort to purify and legitimize the practice within Orthodox Catholic theology, reining it in.
So it moved away from the more dramatic, charismatic practices towards a more structured and perhaps cautious approach. What were the practical implications of this new ritual? How did it change how exorcisms were actually performed and perceived?
Well, this new rite advanced a markedly skeptical view of possession for its time, emphasizing rigorous discernment. It insisted that every phenomenon was to be considered natural unless it was obviously supernatural, effectively making genuine demonic possession a negative miracle that was extremely difficult to prove.
A high bar for proof.
A very high bar. This set a standard for diagnosis, urging caution against misattribution. The rite's structure included crucial instructions for the exorcist, emphasizing prayer, fasting, and the frequent reception of penance and Holy Communion by the possessed person. It mandated having a crucifix and carefully encased relics at hand, but explicitly prohibited holding the Holy Eucharist over the possessed to avoid desecration. The exorcist was also forbidden from engaging in senseless prattle or superfluous questions about future or hidden matters, focusing solely on the expulsion.
No asking the demon for lottery numbers then.
Definitely not. The liturgical flow typically began with the gospel reading of Luke 11.14-22, followed by anointings, signing with the cross, and culminating in threefold great adjurations. For example, I adjure you, ancient serpent, each with a slightly different emphasis, all powerfully reminding the devil of God's power and Christ's incarnation.
It sounds like it transformed the role of the exorcist as well, almost making it a heroic spiritual calling rather than a common parish duty.
It absolutely did. Exorcism became a proving ground for priestly authority, something of a super sacrament, reserved only for the most heroic priests. It elevated the stature and mystique of the exorcist within the church hierarchy, implying a profound spiritual fortitude was required.
And this rite lasted a long time.
An incredibly long time. This 1614 rite remained the official Catholic liturgy until 1999. Making it the longest-lived of all Tridentine liturgies, a testament to its enduring influence and the stability it brought to what had previously been a much more chaotic practice.
Speaking of dramatic events, the 17th century also brought us the infamous convent possessions. How did these cases, often involving large numbers of nuns, fit into this period of resurgence and intense regulation?
Ah, yes, the centrality of nuns to cases of possession was indeed a distinctive and deeply troubling feature of 17th century exorcism. These cases were almost invariably linked with accusations of witchcraft and magic, often involving large numbers of demoniacs within religious communities.
Why nuns specifically?
That's a complex question. Perhaps seen as spiritually vulnerable or living in closed communities where mass hysteria could spread. A notable early example is the 1609 Aix-en-Provence case, where Ursuline nun Madeleine de Mendonclos-La Pelude blamed her possession on bewitchment by her confessor, Louis Gaufridi, who was eventually convicted of witchcraft and burned at the stake.
Burned at the stake.
Yes.
Yes.
Then there's the incredibly famous Loudun possessions of the 1630s involving Urbain Grandier, a priest accused of bewitching the Ursuline nuns, and Jeanne des Anges, the prioress. What makes Loudun particularly intriguing is the case of the Jesuit Surin's expiatory possession, a unique instance of suffering endured for Christ that merged the agony of possession with Jesuit spirituality, transforming it into a spiritual asset, a form of self-sacrifice, rather than just something to be eliminated.
Wow, possessing yourself for Christ, that's complex.
Very complex. It shows the diverse ways possession was understood even then.
Even with these dramatic and highly public events, there were still stirrings of skepticism within Catholicism itself. It wasn't a universally accepted practice even among Catholics and even within the ranks of the clergy, was it?
That's entirely right. Skepticism wasn't just a modern phenomenon. It predated the 1630s. As early as 1583, the Synod of Reims, influenced by moderate Catholics, cautioned against exorcism, noting pointedly that many people had more need of a physician than an exorcist.
A doctor, not an exorcist, even back then.
Exactly. Henri IV even used probative exorcisms in the Marthe-Brossier case, secretly administering holy water as an early form of placebo control to test the genuineness of the possession, revealing an early scientific mindset. What's truly fascinating here is that the Loudun case, in particular, ignited significant epistemological anxieties among French Jesuits. An anonymous treatise, De Sacris Exorcismis by G.T., revealed these concerns. G.T. questioned the infallibility of demons' truthfulness during interrogations, appealing to the personal experience of his Jesuit colleagues who witnessed Loudun.
So they started doubting what the demons said.
Yes. He even challenged the unique clerical claim to exorcistic power, noting that Christ's promise to cast out demons wasn't tied solely to clergy. This highlights the active internal debates and doubts that were actively shaping the practice, even as it was experiencing a resurgence, indicating a growing demand for intellectual rigor.
And Catholic exorcism wasn't confined to Europe, was it? How did it adapt as it spread across the globe with Counter-Reformation missionaries, encountering vastly different spiritual landscapes?
Far from it. Counter-Reformation missionaries, particularly the Jesuits, actively adapted exorcism as they encountered diverse cultures. In Ireland, for instance, exorcism became a weapon and force for the conversion of Protestants during a period of intense religious conflict.
A weapon for conversion.
In a sense. There's a vivid story from 1665 of Edmund Nangle, a Protestant landlord who exorcised himself after a vision of hell and the Virgin Mary, where blessed bees supposedly drove out vermin from within him, leading to his conversion.
Blessed bees. Okay.
It's a strange one. In the Netherlands, Jansenist-influenced clergy like Johannes van Nierkassel grew skeptical of dramatic possessions, suggesting many supposed demoniacs were fraudulent. In China, Eugenio Menegan's research in Fuan, 1697 to 98, shows exorcism was linked with baptism and ritual healing, serving as a powerful point of contact between European and local beliefs that empowered missionaries. And in Spanish America, Franciscan friars in places like Bicuyu, New Mexico, 1756 to 1766, used exorcism not just on possessed women and girls, but to rid the landscape of the old gods by physically erasing native rock art and inscribing crosses in their place.
Erasing native art as exorcism.
Yes, a form of cultural and spiritual conquest. Though interestingly, the Mexican Inquisition often showed a lack of interest in these frontier cases, perhaps due to distance or a different focus. These examples demonstrate the immense flexibility and contextual adaptation of the rite as it moved across the globe.
So what does this all mean for the 18th and 19th centuries, often called the Age of Reason and Doubt? We might expect exorcism to fade entirely in the face of scientific and philosophical advancements, but the reality is far more nuanced. What was the climate like for exorcism during this intellectually turbulent period?
It was indeed a period of profound tension. Catholicism was philosophically divided during the 18th century, caught between conservative neo-scholasticism, a revival of medieval scholastic philosophy, particularly strong in Spain, and the burgeoning Enlightenment thought emerging from France, which emphasized reason and individualism.
A real split.
Definitely. Rome, attempting to steer a middle course between what it saw as superstitious exuberance on one hand and outright denial of demonic possession on the other, imposed increasingly strict controls on the practice. This included strictures from 1710 that required bishops to report exorcisms, depute examiners, and licensed clergy, effectively pushing exorcism to the margins of Catholic life.
So more bureaucracy, less exorcism.
Pretty much. Popular manuals like Mengi's Compendio dell'arte esorcistica were even prohibited in 1707, reflecting the hierarchy's desire to control and restrict what it considered potentially problematic practices.
Yet despite these top-down restrictions and the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, lay demand for exorcism clearly persisted. People still sought these spiritual interventions.
Absolutely. The wildly successful healing campaign of Johann Joseph Gassner in 1774-75 in Upper Swabia is a powerful illustration of this continued popular need. Gassner, a Catholic priest, gained widespread fame performing charismatic exorcisms that didn't necessarily involve accusations of witchcraft, but demonstrated a deep-seated popular desire for spiritual intervention against perceived afflictions.
A charismatic healer.
Exactly. What's particularly fascinating here is the parallel drawn between Gassner's methods and those of Franz Anton Mesmer's animal magnetism. Mesmer, known for his scientific healings, observed convulsive behaviors in his patients similar to those attributed to demonic possession. However, he framed animal magnetism as a natural force, shifting the vocabulary away from religion and towards scientific study.
Ah, so the same phenomenon, but explained differently.
That's the idea. This shows how an enduring human experience, the conviction of being influenced by an external invisible force, was being reinterpreted through new secular lenses, even as the religious explanation was being curtailed by the church.
So a blend of old beliefs and new interpretations. What about the Spanish Tratado from the early 18th century? Did it reflect these changing attitudes or cling to older ideas?
The early 18th century Spanish Tratado on exorcism was somewhat anachronistic in its demonology, drawing heavily from earlier centuries, yet it also showed signs of adaptation. While it maintained older beliefs, for instance, that demons could occupy specific spaces, like a toe, a corner of a room, or even in clothes and hair.
Demons in your hair.
That was the belief. But it also introduced gentler practices, advising against turning exorcisms into spectacles or using direct physical violence against a demoniac. Yet it still advised exorcists to insult the devil and even spit in the demoniac's face to show contempt for the possessing entity.
Spitting in their face. Still pretty physical.
Oh yes. It reveals an intriguing mix of caution and older visceral beliefs about the physicality of demonic presence, even as the Enlightenment brought calls for more reasoned, less sensational approaches. It was a complex transitional document. Amidst these shifts, papal caution became a defining characteristic, marking a concerted effort by the highest levels of the Church to introduce rigor.
Ooh.
Pope Benedict XIV, in his 1744 brief, urged caution in using the rite. Even more significantly, his 1745 brief Sollicitudini Nostrae, provoked by the widely publicized case of the Franciscan nun Crescentia Hus, placed a clear obligation on bishops to distinguish between possession and illness, first and foremost.
Distinguish possession from illness. That sounds key.
Absolutely critical.
Right.
This was a crucial instruction that would later be quoted directly in the 1999 rite, solidifying the Church's stance on rigorous discernment and emphasizing collaboration with medical professionals before resorting to exorcism. This was a major step towards a more scientific approach within the Church itself.
And this emphasis on discernment came at a time when Enlightenment skepticism was really taking hold, leading to more medical and even psychological explanations for what was once attributed to demons. It must have created heated debates.
Exactly. The 1746 Cremona case, involving a woman who began vomiting strange objects, sparked heated debates that encapsulated this conflict. Local Jesuits believed it was genuine possession, while a Padua physician, Paolo Valcarenghi, diagnosed mania. An Augustinian canon, Giovanni Cadonici, controversially argued the woman was deliberately faking her symptoms.
Faking it. That's a strong accusation.
It was. This period also saw the playwright Carlo Goldoni in his 1751 play La Finta Ammalata, The Fake Invalid, as one of the first to suggest that demonic possession might arise from nervous illness. This marked a significant cultural shift, moving away from purely theological explanations and opening the door to psychological and medical interpretations, challenging the very framework of demonic influence.
But even with this growing skepticism from the hierarchy and intellectual circles, exorcism continued to be practiced in certain areas, particularly on the fringes of Catholic Europe, suggesting a persistent local demand.
That's absolutely right. For instance, a 1738 ritual printed specifically for Ireland and Scotland explicitly mentioned bewitchment in its title, suggesting its continued use in missionary context where dealing with unbewitchment, that is, reversing spells or curses, was a primary goal.
So focusing on curses and spells.
Yes, even as Rome was actively condemning malefice-focused manuals, those focused on malevolent magic, highlighting a persistent demand for these services on the ground, often adapted to local cultural concerns and beliefs, even when at odds with centralized policy.
A clear tension between official policy and local needs. This brings us to a truly compelling historical anecdote, the Tosos case in early 19th century Spain. It vividly illustrates the dilemma the church faced when popular belief clashed with official caution, setting a precedent that still resonates today.
The Tosos case in Spain in the early 19th century is indeed illustrative of this enduring tension. Women, convinced their possession was due to witchcraft, sought relief at a local shrine. The church found itself in a difficult position. Conducting an official exorcism would have constituted an endorsement of belief in witchcraft, which the hierarchy was eager to avoid as it aligned too closely with what they viewed as superstition.
So if they exorcised them, they'd be saying witchcraft is real.
That was the fear. They preferred to treat the women as sufferers of mental illness. This desire to distance itself from accusations of witchcraft, while also not denying the possibility of possession outright, created a significant challenge for the church, forcing it to navigate complex social and theological waters.
And this tension between lay beliefs and the hierarchy stance is nowhere more powerfully captured than in the Peter Moore correspondence. It's a truly compelling anecdote for understanding this historical gap, even in England. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a fascinating story. The correspondence from 1814-1815 details an educated layman named Thomas More, who, after poring over demonological texts in the British Museum, became convinced his brother Peter was possessed.
He diagnosed his own brother.
Essentially, yes.
Huh?
More, armed with his research, demanded an exorcism for Peter from a reluctant Bishop William Poynter. Despite More's insistence and his promise to Peter, Poynter was clearly unwilling to grant such a request. The bishop's eventual curt refusal, "I must decline granting a license," to any other clergyman, perfectly exemplifies this typical gap in views between the laity and hierarchy with respect to exorcism.
And that gap still exists.
Our sources suggest it absolutely persists even today. More, an educated man, was essentially demanding exorcism on demand, based on his own research and conviction, but the cautious bishop, bound by the church's increasing regulations, was having none of it, highlighting the institutional control over such powerful rights.
As we enter the 20th and 21st centuries, the story of exorcism presents two compelling, almost contradictory narratives. One sees it as a practice of growing obsolescence, a cultural throwback that had no place in modern theology or a scientifically advanced world.
Right, its outdated view.
Exactly. The other, however, describes a powerful revival rooted in a surprising place. Late 19th century Catholic interest in parapsychology, the scientific study of occult phenomena.
Parapsychology?
Yeah.
Like ESP and ghosts.
Kind of. This allowed for a discourse on the supernatural that bridged retrograde superstition and materialistic skepticism, providing a renewed framework for understanding and addressing spiritual phenomena in a modern context. It was about finding a scientific lens for the seemingly unscientific.
That's fascinating, finding a scientific angle.
And this revival wasn't just about abstract theological debates, was it? It involved charismatic figures who almost became symbols of this renewed engagement with the demonic. Figures who blurred the lines between holiness and the extraordinary.
Absolutely. Think of St. Jean-Marie Vianney in the 19th century, known as a charismatic exorcist saint. Demons were said to flee simply in the presence of his holiness, not necessarily through formal rites, a testament to his sanctity.
His holiness scared them off.
Apparently so. Then there's Antoine Gay, a prophetic demoniac or demoniac saint, whose possession was intentionally left unexorcised as an asset for the French church in his fight against secularism. His case echoed that of Crescentia Huss in the previous century, where possession was understood as a trial from God rather than a simple sin, making formal exorcism far from straightforward and sometimes even a tool for broader spiritual warfare against secularization.
So keeping the demon was useful.
In a very specific strategic way, yes. It's complex.
It seems fears of Satanism also played a particularly potent role in shaping these modern perceptions, especially in certain regions like France and Italy.
Indeed. Belief in Satanism was particularly potent in France and Italy, often fueled by anxieties about social change and secularization. Roman propaganda even went so far as to associate Turin with the city of the devil due to its policy of religious toleration, portraying it as a hotbed of supposed devil worship.
Wow. City of the devil.
Yeah, strong stuff. This climate of fear also influenced cultural works like J.K. Heisman's 1891 novel La Bas, which drew inspiration from the controversial laicized priest Joseph Antoine Boulan, who practiced a mixture of magic and exorcism, further feeding into public anxieties about organized Satanism and its perceived threat to society. Now, here's where it gets truly pivotal for the modern era. Pope Leo XIII's Exorcism against Satan and the Apostate Angels. Composed around 1890 and added to the Ritual Romanum in 1925, this was a truly distinctive development.
Leo III's prayer. What was different about it?
Unlike the traditional major rite, it was written in the first-person plural, exorcismus, we exorcise, suggesting a collective act of the entire church, not just an individual priest. It explicitly referred to every diabolical sect and gathering, aligning with Leo's concerns about organized Satanism, and made specific mention of the Immaculate Conception and commanded Satan to stop harming the church. Crucially, this was a general exorcism not tied to a specific person or object and could be used privately by priests and by the laity, even remotely.
The laity could use it themselves.
Yes, initially. This is a tacit acknowledgement that the traditional major rite had limitations and provided an alternative to ensure Catholics could continue to confront the devil in a broader, more accessible sense beyond individual cases of possession.
And this formalization continued with the 1917 Code of Canon Law, bringing more structure and rules to the practice, solidifying who could perform exorcisms and under what conditions.
It did, and it had a significant impact on the actual practice. The 1917 Code required diligent and prudent investigation to determine genuine possession, formally restricted the major exorcism, the solemn rite to priests, preventing deacons and seminarians and minor orders from performing it. But interestingly, it explicitly permitted exorcisms of non-Catholics.
Exorcising non-Catholics.
Yes, underlining its missionary potential, perhaps. It also clarified the distinction between major and minor exorcisms, stating that minor exorcisms, such as the blessing of holy water and its apotropaic use for everyday spiritual protection, could be performed by any priest or deacon without episcopal permission, giving a degree of flexibility for everyday spiritual protection and underscoring the ubiquity of demonic threat.
Despite these efforts at formalization, the mid-20th century, particularly the 1960s and 1970s, seemed to represent a low point for exorcism. It almost faded into obscurity, didn't it?
Indeed, this period was a nadir, with exorcisms rarer perhaps than they had been at any time since the 18th century. The prevailing theological mood was increasingly skeptical of a literal devil, captured by Herbert Haig's influential 1969 book Abschied vom Teufel, Goodbye to the Devil, which rejected a literal belief in the devil as a spiritual personality.
So theology was moving away from a literal devil.
In many influential circles, yes. American Jesuits Henry Ansgar Kelly and Juan B. Cortez further argued that the New Testament distinguished between unclean spirits, which they saw as personifications of illness, and Satan, concluding that no one could be possessed by the devil or a fallen angel. This intellectual climate pushed exorcism further to the margins, seeing it as a cultural anachronism rather than a theological necessity.
But then something dramatic happened that reignited global interest and truly initiated what we're calling the Second Golden Age. William Friedkin's 1973 film The Exorcist. That movie, based on the 1949 Robbie Mannheim case in Mount Rainier, caught global attention and undeniably changed everything. It also established a new cultural pattern, didn't it?
It absolutely did. The film had an unparalleled cultural impact, shaping popular perceptions of exorcism for decades to come, even for those within the church. The cultural pattern it established often linked possessions not to traditional bewitchments or curses, but to meddling with the occult, particularly through things like Ouija boards.
Ah, the Ouija board connection.
Right. This reflected the influence of spiritualism in America, which tended to interpret all spirits as spirits of the dead rather than purely evil demons. So the perceived source of demonic influence shifted in the popular imagination, focusing more on spiritual experimentation gone wrong.
Tragically, this renewed interest also coincided with real-life cases that brought the potential dangers of exorcism into stark relief, like the notorious Anneliese Michel case in 1975 in Germany.
The Anneliese Michel case in Germany is indeed a real-life tragedy that continues to resonate and highlights the inherent risks. Despite requests from priests and Michel herself, Bishop Joseph Stangl initially resisted authorizing a major exorcism.
The bishop resisted.
Yes, initially. It was only after a Jesuit, Rodwick, provided an expert opinion for genuine possession and under immense pressure that permission was granted for a small exorcism. The tragic outcome was Michel's death, ruled as a result of dehydration and malnutrition.
That's horrifying.
It is. Her story was later adapted into the film The Exorcism of Emily Rose, though that film, arguably, softened the church's responsibility, altering facts to make the institution seem much more responsible than the historical complexities might suggest.
And on the heels of the film and these real cases, we saw authors like Malachi Martin influencing popular perception, even outside official church channels, creating almost a service industry for spiritual intervention.
Malachi Martin's 1976 book, Hostage to the Devil, despite its questioned reliability and sensationalism, profoundly informed popular perceptions of Catholic exorcism. It notably dissociated exorcism from its formal authorization by a diocesan bishop, influencing non-denominational lay exorcists like Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Warrens, from the movies.
The very same. They adopted a pluralistic view of exorcism's efficacy, using Catholic demonology, but operating independently of formal ecclesiastical structures, effectively turning sacramental-style exorcism into a spiritual commodity or service industry, outside formal church control, especially in America, catering to a burgeoning spiritual marketplace.
So in this modern era, what do contemporary Catholic exorcists actually believe, and how do they approach the rite? Are there different schools of thought among them, or a unified front?
There are indeed differing approaches even among prominent exorcists. Gabriel Amorth, for instance, the famous Vatican exorcist, emphasized Satanism, curses, and witchcraft as primary sources of demonic influence, distinguishing him from earlier parapsychology-influenced theologians.
So more traditional causes.
Yes. He also adapted the rite to include the Virgin Mary, and strongly insisted on the importance of experience, famously stating it's like demanding that someone perform surgery after reading a textbook. You need practical training. Jeremy Davies, the exorcist of England's Archdiocese of Westminster, also views occult practices as a channel for the demonic, and cautions against alternative therapies, not necessarily as satanic, but as autosuggestion that sinfully wasted faith.
Wasted faith. Interesting.
Then there's Jose Antonio Fortea, whose Summa Demoniaca 2008 is the first contemporary example of an exorcist manual based on the 1999 rite. He classifies causes of possession, including child offerings to Satan, spiritualism, and controversially believes that the souls of the damned are able to possess exactly the same as a demon.
Souls of the damned possessing people.
That's his view. He permits lay presence, allowing them to pray the rosary, but strictly prohibits them from speaking during the exorcism, maintaining priestly authority.
We also can't talk about modern exorcism without touching on the Catholic charismatic renewal, which brought its own spin to the practice, often called deliverance ministry, blurring some of the traditional lines.
The Catholic charismatic renewal emerged, for many, as a conservative backlash against the reforms of Vatican II, seeking a return to more overt spiritual manifestations. It also incorporated new ideas, often from Protestant groups.
Like what?
Well, Francis McNutt, an American Dominican, believed in baptism in the Holy Spirit and argued that charismatic deliverance was equivalent to a minor exorcism, thus not requiring episcopal permission, which sidestepped hierarchical control. He later contended that possession is extremely rare, suggesting less need for formal exorcism. However, this movement wasn't without its controversies. Archbishop Emmanuel Malingo of Zambia created an exorcism cult, combining Catholicism with elements of local animistic religion, performing highly public exorcisms and eventually clashing with Rome over his practices.
Public exorcisms. That sounds risky.
It can be. The dangers were tragically evident in cases like John Reichenbach in Australia, 1993, where a lay exorcist was accused of causing death, and a charismatic Catholic priest, John Shanley, testified about the gross physicality of possession, even refusing to condemn violence, highlighting the alarming potential for abuse. The Vatican responded in 1985, with Cardinal Ratzinger instructing that it was not permitted for the Christian laity to administer the formula of exorcism against Satan and the apostate angels, Leo V's general exorcism.
So they pulled back permission for the laity.
Exactly. He mandated that gatherings in which prayers are administered in order to obtain liberation should be moderated and placed under clerical direction, clearly differentiating them from sacramental exorcism and controlling potential abuses. This was a critical reassertion of clerical authority. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the culmination of these centuries of evolution, debate, and resurgence is the 1999 rite, officially titled De exorcismis et supplicatibus quibusdam, on exorcisms and certain supplications.
The current rite, how did it change things?
This rite was carefully designed to retain the essential structure and principal components of the 1614 rite, which had endured for so long, but it made significant omissions, such as the direct imperative praecipio tibi, I command you, reflecting a shift in tone. It also showed a general prejudice against conjurations. Crucially, the 1999 rite made allowances for vernacular translations and adaptation of rites and gestures attentive to the culture and genius of the people, particularly for animistic cultures where certain ritual acts like exfoliation, blowing on the possessed, hold powerful significance. This was a conscious effort to make the rite globally applicable and culturally sensitive.
And it also put very strict controls on how these events could be shared with the public, didn't it? A clear move to prevent the sensationalism we've often seen in media.
Yes, this was a very significant institutional shift towards privacy and away from public spectacle. The rite explicitly stated, medias communicationis socialis omnibus, dum pregitor exorcismus nullo modo spatium detur. No media space whatsoever is to be given to social communication media while an exorcism is being performed.
No cameras allowed.
Basically, yes. Furthermore, exorcists and attendees were strictly instructed not to divulge information. This was a clear, firm move to prevent the sensationalism that had often plagued the practice and compromised the dignity of the individuals involved. Despite the new rite's caution and the media restrictions, the demand for exorcism has persisted, to the extent that the Regina Apostolorum University in Rome began an exorcism course in 2005, and specialized centers have emerged in places like Poland and the U.S., indicating a clear institutional recognition of this ongoing global need.
Okay, let's unpack this even further and look beyond Catholic Christianity for a moment. While we've been focused on its rich and complex history within the Catholic tradition, the phenomenon of exorcism, in a broader sense of casting out unwanted spirits, is actually nearly universal. It's not limited to Abrahamic faiths at all. What does that tell us about a fundamental human experience that transcends specific religious frameworks?
It tells us a great deal about a pervasive human need to categorize and confront unseen forces. Scholars across disciplines acknowledge similar rituals in places like China, India, Tibet, and Japan, where religious experts are called upon to cast out spirits causing strange effects.
So spirit expulsion is everywhere.
Pretty much. What's interesting is that these entities might not be called demons in the Western sense. They could be spirits of the dead, fox spirits, or other local classifications. This shows a fundamental human experience of spiritual distress and the need for ritualized intervention, regardless of the specific theological framework. It points to a deep underlying human inclination to seek explanation and relief from forces beyond our immediate control.
What's truly fascinating here is how diverse these cross-cultural understandings can be, especially when it comes to the nature of possession. We often equate possession with something negative, but that's not always the case, is it?
Precisely. Take old Finnish beliefs, for example. Everything was thought to have a guardian spirit, a haltija. Humans also had a luanto, a guardian spirit from the underworld, acquired in infancy. A strong luanto could make someone incredibly gifted, a hunter, a warrior, or even a witch.
A guardian spirit makes you powerful.
Yes, during certain rituals, a witch could become possessed by his spirit, exhibiting behaviors like trembling, rolling eyes, sweating, and foaming at the mouth. Yet this was seen as a source of power, not necessarily an evil affliction to be expelled.
So possession could be good?
In that context, yes. This vividly illustrates how possession isn't universally derided. It can be a pinnacle of divine or spiritual interaction, a source of strength or extraordinary ability, rather than a sign of evil to be fought against. This really challenges our culturally ingrained assumptions.
And what about Islam? How does it approach spirit expulsion, if at all, given its own distinct theological framework?
Well, in Islam, the concept of exorcism, as understood in Christianity, is largely absent from the Quran itself. While some scholars interpret one da'if, weak hadith or tradition about the Prophet Muhammad laying his hand on an epileptic boy as a form of exorcism, others question this classification.
So no clear exorcism in the Quran?
Not in the same way. The Quranic solution to Satan's attacks is primarily spiritual and personal, to be a good, righteous person and to follow the Quranic commandments. This emphasizes internal piety and adherence to divine law as protection. The term jinn in Islam is also understood differently from Christian demons. They are described as invisible human beings or hidden creatures like bacteria and germs with their own free will, rather than necessarily malevolent spirits in the Christian sense.
Jinn aren't necessarily evil.
Not inherently, no. This highlights a distinctly different theological framework for understanding and addressing spiritual threats, often less focused on ritualized expulsion and more on righteous living.
So there's no theological room for positive possession in Christianity, and Islam has a very different framework. It really reinforces the point that the interpretation of evil and spiritual interaction is incredibly culturally relative.
Exactly. This reinforces the point that possession is by no means universally derided. Many religions focus on possession as the pinnacle of divine interaction, a form of divine presence or empowerment. In contrast, within the Christian tradition, there is no theological room to allow for positive possession. Therefore, it is always a negative state that requires expulsion and liberation. This fundamental difference in interpretation shapes everything from the initial diagnosis of symptoms to the ritual itself, and indeed, the entire worldview surrounding spiritual phenomena.
This clash of worldviews must have led to some intense misunderstandings when Christian missionaries encountered animistic cultures. Can you give us a particularly striking example of this friction?
Oh yes. A poignant example is the 1907 Umvinto exorcism case in South Africa, involving a Christian convert named Germana. She willingly made pacts with the devil, which deeply baffled her European exorcists.
She made pacts willingly.
That's what the accounts say. Germana's animistic understanding of the spiritual world viewed it as a community of spirits with whom she could make beneficial agreements, a stark contrast to her European exorcists' struggle between good and evil in a dualistic adversarial framework.
Completely different ways of seeing the spirit world.
Completely. This fundamental clash contributed to Bishop Delal's incredulity and frustration. Her exorcisms were rapid, lasting only a day and a half, which was also confounding to the clergy who expected a bitter struggle lasting much longer, further highlighting how easily cultural assumptions could distort the interpretation of spiritual phenomena, even when both parties believed in spiritual forces.
With such diverse interpretations, it's crucial to establish some common ground for discussing possession, especially when theology and science intersect. How do we even define it clinically, from a medical or psychological perspective, to allow for a productive dialogue?
That's a really important point. Clinically, possession can be defined as the presence of a belief, delusional or otherwise, held by an individual, and sometimes by others, that their symptoms, experiences, and behavior are under the influence or control of supernatural forces, often of diabolical origin.
So the definition focuses on the belief.
Yes, the belief is key from a clinical standpoint, but it's vital that clinical approaches are culturally sensitive and give adequate theological attention, rather than inadvertently making theology a part of the pathology itself. It's about understanding the interpretive framework the individual brings to their experience, respecting their worldview, not dismissing it out of hand as simply a mental illness. It's a delicate balance.
So it's not about making a judgment, but understanding the patient's context. But what about the more controversial idea that demons might actually cause mental disorder? Is this a view held by anyone beyond a fringe view?
Well, this is indeed a highly controversial view within mainstream science, suggesting that demons may actually more or less commonly cause mental disorder.
Oh, well.
While infrequent among medical professionals in Western contexts, it's not uncommon in some religious communities, or even among a significant portion of the general population globally.
Really? How common?
A survey of Protestant Christians in Australia, for example, found that 36.6% of respondents indicated that mental illness might be caused by demon possession.
Wow, over a third.
Yeah. This understanding often views demons as an ontologically real infectious agent that can either cause or mimic psychiatric conditions, thus requiring a careful differential diagnosis to distinguish them from purely natural, medically treatable causes. It's a perspective that medical and psychological professionals increasingly have to confront in a culturally sensitive manner.
That's a powerful statistic showing just how prevalent that belief can be. This seems to suggest a spectrum of understanding, from a very literal interpretation to a more scientific one. We have a helpful chart that illustrates these different approaches to understanding such phenomena. On one end of the spectrum, we have theological purity. This approach is characterized by a literal hermeneutic, meaning a literal interpretation of sacred texts, seeing evil as externalized and dualistic, a clear struggle between good and evil, leading directly to deliverance ministry exorcism. Robin Gill describes this as deriving doctrine exclusively from sacred texts and viewing it in radical conflict with the secular world. It often involves a rigid mind-body and spirit dualism and can, in its more extreme forms, lead to a heightened sense of spiritual warfare.
Right, the very literal black and white view.
Then, in the middle, we have theological complexity. This is a more nuanced approach, embracing a biopsychosocial spiritual anthropology, recognizing biological, psychological, social, and spiritual dimensions. It views evil as a mystery rather than a simple external entity. This leads to a diagnostic AIMD spiritual formulation and spiritually integrated treatment, attempting to reconcile different perspectives and work collaboratively.
Kind of a middle ground integrating different factors.
And finally, on the other end, we find theological realism. This approach leans towards demythologization, removing supernatural elements and reinterpreting them metaphorically, seeing evil as internalized within a psychospiritual unity, and relying primarily on psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy as solutions. It seeks to demythologize the concept of evil, often with a high degree of certainty in its scientific reductionism, attributing all phenomena to known natural causes.
Basically explaining it all away scientifically. An immediate objection to this spectrum might be the God of the gaps argument. The idea that scientific understanding will eventually explain all complex cases and true possession will simply vanish as knowledge advances.
Right. Science will figure it all out eventually.
And while that may well be true one day, we are not yet in that place of omniscient understanding. This spectrum is offered as a practical approach to reconciling theological with medical and scientific perspectives, acknowledging the present limitations of knowledge in all these fields. It provides boundaries between what is evidence-based and what is open to legitimate diversity of opinion, allowing for a more complete approach to human suffering.
And it seems modern exorcists themselves are often quite aware of these distinctions, aren't they? They don't necessarily deny medical explanations. In fact, many actively collaborate with them.
Precisely. Modern exorcists often do not deny the medical or psychological aspects of an affliction. Indeed, the Church's 1999 rite emphasizes thorough medical and psychological evaluation before an exorcism. As our sources state, some illnesses are not so straightforward. There may be a satanic element, but medicine and surgery may be required. Thus, everything should be done with prayer, for the Lord God is our healer. This reflects a unified medico-spiritual approach that seeks to incorporate both dimensions in seeking resolution, rather than viewing them as mutually exclusive. It's about bringing all possible resources to bear on the suffering individual.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite sobering.
Yeah.
While the history of exorcism is fascinating, we must confront its dark side. The grave dangers and controversies, including fatalities and abuse that have unfortunately resulted from botched or misguided exorcism.
Yeah, this is the really tough part.
The sources highlight tragic instances, like 3 young children killed by their minister father during an exorcism in South Korea, or the death of Farida Rai in the UK after a therapeutic beating by a religious teacher convinced it would beat the jinn out of her. These are not just historical footnotes. They are stark reminders of the profound human cost and the ethical minefield that emerges when this practice goes wrong.
These tragic cases also bring to light the psychological aspects involved, particularly what's been termed the alibi phenomenon. The phrase, "the devil made me do it," can at times serve as a potential alibi, absolving individuals from blame or responsibility for actions committed while supposedly possessed.
Using possession as an excuse.
Potentially. These actions might in some cases be manifestation of psychological repressions or underlying mental health issues. It's critical to emphasize that individuals seeking exorcism are inherently emotionally vulnerable, making them particularly susceptible to harm, and their choice to undergo such a ritual may be far less free or informed than it appears, given their state of distress. This vulnerability creates a significant ethical challenge for practitioners.
And this vulnerability is often exploited or exacerbated by media portrayals, which tend to sensationalize the practice, creating unrealistic expectations and perhaps even encouraging dangerous behaviors.
Indeed. The media often presents a highly sensationalized and distorted version of exorcism, far removed from the sober reality. As one Reddit user, Jlaycock, aptly put it, most exorcisms are pretty boring. The media can't show an exorcism where nothing is happening and there is no danger.
Boring exorcisms don't make good TV.
Exactly. Hollywood tropes, levitation, vomiting glass or nails, toads appearing in beds, are far removed from the reality that the majority of exorcisms are somewhat solemn affairs of prayer and quiet intercession. Even films based on real events, like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, inspired by the Anneliese Michel case, altered the story to make the church seem much more responsible for the tragedy than the historical complexities might suggest, showcasing how media can distort complex realities for dramatic effect.
Given these profound risks and the potential for harm, how does the legal system grapple with exorcism, especially concerning issues like consent and actual bodily harm? This is a very complex area, balancing religious freedom with public safety.
It is indeed a labyrinthine legal area, especially in common law jurisdictions like England and Wales. The R.V. Brown ruling established that consent could not be a defense to actual bodily harm or more serious injury unless a recognized exemption applied, which created a challenging legal landscape for activities like exorcism that might involve physical intervention.
So you can't consent to being seriously hurt, even in a ritual.
Generally not in the UK, based on that ruling. In contrast, New Zealand's R.V. Lee adopted a more permissive regime regarding consent in religious contexts. The UK legal system does recognize a religious mortification exemption, for instance, for activities like immersing in cold water as part of a ritual. But applying this to exorcism is a heated debate, balancing individual liberty and freedom of religious practice with protecting the vulnerable from harm.
A tough balancing act.
Very much so. A serious drawback of judicial discretion in such cases, however, is the uncertainty as to whether any particular instance of physical harm is permitted, leaving both practitioners and participants in a precarious legal and ethical position. It's a profound dilemma for society.
So what does this all mean? Our deep dive into the history of Catholic exorcism has been a journey through a truly fascinating and often turbulent tapestry of belief and practice. We've traced its ambiguous ancient roots, understood how it served a critical missionary purpose, witnessed its formalization and dramatic peaks during the Counter-Reformation, followed its path through periods of skepticism and marginalization in the Age of Reason, and finally observed its powerful modern resurgence and adaptation in a globalized world.
It really covers a huge sweep of history.
It really does. It's a story of constant interplay between theological shifts, evolving cultural contexts, and deeply personal human experiences that have shaped this enduring, often controversial practice.
For you, the listener, this deep dive offers crucial insights far beyond the confines of religious history. It provides a powerful lens through which to understand how cultures across millennia grapple with the very concept of evil, defining the ever-shifting boundaries between the sacred and the profane. It reveals the continuous, often fraught dialogue between faith, emerging scientific understanding, and the profound complexities of the human psyche. Ultimately, exorcism, in its myriad forms and interpretations, reflects a fundamental human need to confront, categorize, and seek liberation from perceived malign forces, whether those forces are believed to be external, spiritual entities, or deeply internal psychological struggles. It tells us something fundamental about the human condition itself.
And this leaves us with a provocative thought. As societies advance and our scientific understanding of the mind and body deepens, the guises of the devil himself and the strategies employed to redress his incursions shift. What does the continued and even resurgent human inclination to personify and actively combat evil, even amidst incredible medical and psychological advancements, reveal about an enduring aspect of the human condition that transcends time and culture? Is it an inherent need to externalize internal struggles, or does it point to something more, a persistent spiritual reality that continues to challenge our understanding? It's a question that continues to echo through the ages.